Emma, in terms of the substance of the policy issues that were described, how well do you think the candidates performed?
Well, I think, unfortunately, Jeremy, the policy substance of this, and there was a fair bit of policy substance, is going to be completely obscured by the performance and what you've just been talking about around, that this was pretty disastrous for Biden. But for me, in terms of the policy substance, one of the most astounding things was that January 6 and Trump's clear and present threat to American democracy didn't come up until about halfway through, or half an hour in, I think, to the debate. And what that does is place democracy and the genuine stakes of this election just in a kind of long list of policy issues. And that, alongside what a disastrous performance this was from Joe Biden, I think will mean that this election is fought on those issues of age, on really kind of shallow issues, rather than what are the actual stakes. And that's potentially disastrous for American democracy and, as you were just discussing, for the rest of the world as well.
To what extent are people in the United States really hung up on this idea about the immigration framework that they're operating in right now?
Look, I think Republicans and Trump supporters in particular have been really successful in forcing this issue to the forefront. I think much of it is a manufactured crisis. Trump has done this repeatedly. Last election cycle, it was about trains of immigrants coming to the border, and so they've become very practiced, I think, at running these lines. And Biden, I think, has almost kind of fallen into this trap of trying to, I guess, outmaneuver the right on this and go even harder on immigration. And so we saw him pass that executive order around border crossings. But what that's done, I think, is reinforce a perception particularly on the right, that he is weak on immigration. And that's why the Republicans keep hammering it. It's why the right-wing media universe keeps hammering it. And I think, again and again, especially today, Biden fell into the trap of reacting to Trump rather than getting ahead of issues. And that meant that, the fact that Trump was kind of just continually, as we just heard, lying, Biden wasn't able to respond to that in a substantive way. And I think possibly part of that was, to go back to what we were hearing earlier, was actually that he was over-prepared, potentially. He was trying to jam in so much policy substance into all of his answers, which I think ended up, confusing things, making him seem like he was rambling even more than he was. And so, again, that substance is lost, and what you're left with is lines from Trump about the crisis at the border that, unfortunately, have significant cut-through.
Emma Shortis, on the reproductive rights issue, Donald Trump said a couple of times that this is something that people wanted, that legal experts wanted, which is clearly not true.
Clearly not. And he said some absolutely appalling things as well about after-birth abortions, which are, clearly appalling and violent lies. And again, it was pretty astounding, that Joe Biden was not ready, apparently, to refute those. That came early on and his response wasn't clear. And I think that's kind of when Donald Trump knew that he'd gotten him. And I think that's going to be critical for Joe Biden, precisely because of what Julia was just saying about how high up this issue is for voters, for women voters in particular, when 1 in 3 American women now live in states with total abortion bans. And the impacts of that, I think we cannot underestimate. But it's been critical for Joe Biden in terms of mobilising voters. It was critical in the 2022 midterms, getting out votes for Joe Biden. And the fact that he performed so badly in responding to this issue that he should own, that should be an absolute electoral winner for him, I think, given all the other issues that we've been talking about, given that we suspect already turnout is being repressed because of, American apathy with these candidates, again, add it to the long list of significant issues with Biden's performance today that will, I think, potentially have real electoral consequences.
And the fact that we can have a debate where at the end they're discussing and arguing about their golf game.
It was quite bizarre, wasn't it?
About their handicap. That's so, remote from the lives of most people, these two blokes talking about their handicap, at which point Donald Trump says, let's not be children about this. And Biden retorts, you are a child. And then, I don't know, I just, when I look at exchanges like that, I think this is why people get turned off politics.
And it was they were quite serious there. Like, I thought when they went into the golf handicap thing, it was going to be a light sort of, maybe even a laugh between the two of them. But no, they were deadly serious about Joe Biden's golf handicap.
Yeah, it was kind of almost a dark moment in it. And I think viewers were trying to go, are we actually watching this?
Let's settle this on the fairway. Who can lug the golf bag? And anyway, they did commit to a driving contest, so maybe that's to come.
Emma, does it speak to the kind of detachment that these two candidates have to the rest of the electorate? I mean, they're talking about, sort of things going well, talking about their golf game and looking very retrospectively at things that don't necessarily connect with voters today.
It says so much, doesn't it? I think it just adds to that sense that these are two very old candidates who, exactly as Julia was saying, are just not engaging voters. It's so dangerous, I think, how many people are disengaging from politics in the United States. And I think just to go back to the earlier conversation about black voters in particular, that's a really critical point, because there has been some noise about black voters turning to Trump, but I think Biden's almost betrayal, or the sense of betrayal, I think, from black voters from Joe Biden is not something we should underestimate. Joe Biden promised to be a bridge. He promised to be a generational bridge in particular. And as Julia said, the African-American vote and turnout was critical to his 2020 election win. And when you have in, just this same week, a young black member of Congress, Jamal Bowman, being primaried, being pushed out of his seat effectively for his advocacy on Gaza and his advocacy against genocide, voters of colour, African-American voters, I think, feel deeply betrayed by Joe Biden on a number of fronts. And when you combine that potential disengagement, that potential suppression of turnout with the active disenfranchisement of particularly black voters in the South by Republican-controlled state houses, you have a pretty poisonous mix, I think, for a democracy that's already pretty fragile.
Now, Emma, I just want to come to you about your kind of final take, your observations of what needs to happen from here and how salvageable this is, particularly for Joe Biden, considering his performance tonight.
Look, I mean, I couldn't agree more with Julia when I say that, she's right. This is like trying to read tea leaves. It's still a political eternity, still until November. Anything could happen in the interim. Having said that, I am finding it difficult to see how Joe Biden recovers from this. Already we're seeing young Democrats and former Democrats like Julian Castro, who served in the Obama administration, saying that Biden did not clear the bar. So I think the pressure on him is going to be immense, and if he's going to recover, he's going to need to do that very, very quickly. And just to come back to your earlier discussion, I think, viewed from Australia, we need to take this really deeply seriously. So much of the conversation is fixated, I think, on, how the government would manage a relationship with the Trump administration, which assumes that we would need to maintain the same kind of closeness with an administration like that, with a potential president who's just said again that he may not accept a legitimate election result. And I think we in Australia need to have a pretty frank conversation amongst ourselves about what that relationship should look like, what we want it to look like going forward, and whether we want to be tied so closely to the version of America that we saw this afternoon.
Do you think it will have a contaminating effect on the sort of discourse here, not just on the validity of election results, but things like climate change, on reproductive rights?
I think we can see that already. I think particularly in the right of the Liberal Party and even the opposition leader, we can see the same kind of language, that comes out of Donald Trump land. We can see, talk of like woke issues and hardline immigration issues, which of course Australia has a long history on already, particularly also attacks on trans people and minorities. So I am deeply worried about that kind of contamination. And I think we can see those kind of feedback loops amongst the far right already between Europe and the United States and between the United States and Australia. So yeah, there are concerns out there, I think, on a number of fronts, and we shouldn't lose sight of that by focusing on the optics.
Dr. Emma Shortis, Bill Wyman, Julia Baird, terrific to have all three of you with David Spears for our analysis after that presidential debate in the US. Thank you all.
Thanks for watching. We love that we can make these videos free to watch, but they're not free to make. It's thanks to our generous supporters that we can keep making research and content that changes minds. So, if you like what we do, please consider giving to the Australia Institute so we can keep doing it. Visit our website australiainstitute.org.au and click the donate button to see how your support can help fund high quality research that matters.